As gamers, video games unironically hold a special and important place in our lives. It might sound incredulous, but it's simply true. As a gamer who loves philosophy, the natural question and premise of this video is what would each Greek philosopher think about video games? Their thoughts on the human experience have endured in validity for a multitude of centuries, so what would these visionaries say about such a modern and surely unforeseen pastime? Well, stick around and I'll tell you. Without further ado, let's get into today's agenda. I think it's important to provide context for why this question is intriguing to kind of frame our conversation today. I've always been in awe at the fact that humans who lived roughly 2,500 years ago had ideas that still, to this day, accurately portray the foundations of human existence. Even though an inconceivable amount of time has changed in terms of our external living conditions, somehow, some way, these ancient Greek dudes achieved introspections that remain the North Star of all philosophical endeavors thousands of years later. Like, wow. In other words, they gave us frameworks that we still use to this day to understand human behavior. It's utterly amazing that the apotheosis of philosophy came so long ago because typically apotheosis always happens in lifetime, right? Take, for example, the recent Artemis mission. I think voyaging to the far side of the moon and back safely was definitely the pinnacle of science in all of human history. Or Usain Bolt's world record 100-meter dash. Humans are always constantly peaking in different areas of expertise because we build off of the backs of previous generations. And yet, when it comes to philosophy, we always head back to ancient Greece to consider the field's zenith. I think conceptually that's really interesting, and so I thought to myself, if we always go back to hear their thoughts on introspection and the human condition when we try to philosophize, what would they think if they in turn could see some of our external conditions that create what we call life here in the big 2026? So, how this will work is I'll briefly describe the philosophers and their beliefs, and then extrapolate from there what I believe their take would be on video games as an activity. Let's start with Socrates. Socrates is widely considered the father of Western philosophy, but what's funny is that Socrates didn't leave behind any writings of his own. Instead, his ideas survive primarily through the works of his student, Plato. Socrates' entire philosophical project revolved around questioning assumptions, examining beliefs, and using reasoned dialogue to uncover the truth. So with that in mind, I believe Socrates almost certainly wouldn't start by judging the game itself. He'd instead start by interrogating you. Unlike later philosophers, Socrates, he really handed out prescriptions. His entire method is instead built around questioning assumptions until people realize that they don't actually understand their own beliefs. His most famous statement, recorded in Plato's work Apology, is that the unexamined life is not worth living. And I think that's the lens he'd bring to the concept of gaming, right? Like, why are you playing? Because you enjoy it and it's your self-contained escapist break at the end of the day, or because you're procrastinating from the things you need to do? Because all of your friends are online and you don't want to be left out? Or because you're addicted to loot boxes or progression systems that can earn you special cosmetics? To Socrates, I don't think the activity itself would be an issue. His primary concern would be whether you've examined your relationship with it. Ironically, I think Socrates would respect someone who can clearly articulate why gaming enriches their life more than someone who mindlessly scrolls social media for the same amount of time that an avid gamer spends gaming. So I think Socrates would land on having respect for the thoughtful gamer who has a conscientious framework for their life holistically and only slots gaming into their schedule in service of their mental wellness. But at the same time, I think Socrates would look down on the gamer who games thoughtlessly with no self-control or constraint and at the, detriment of their holistic wellness and connection with the world around them. Because, as he famously says, unexamined life is not worth living. Let's move on down the lineage, though, to his student Plato. So, if Socrates laid the foundation for Western philosophy, Plato built the first great philosophical system on top of it. Plato's most influential work, The Republic, explores everything from justice and politics to education and to the nature of reality itself. Stick with me here, but Plato believed that the physical world is merely a shadow of a deeper, more perfect reality, and that the highest goal of human life is to pursue truth through reason. And this is why I think that Plato would deplore the concept of video games. His entire philosophy revolved around the idea that the physical world is already an imperfect reflection of eternal truth. In the Republic, he argues that artists merely imitate appearances rather than reality itself, making their work far removed from the truth. You see what I'm saying? Like multiple layers down. I think we can all agree that video games take that one step further, right? They're technically simulations of fictional worlds that ask players to emotionally invest in events that basically never happened. And I think to Plato, he would consider this to be pretty dangerous. Another thing about Plato that probably wouldn't click well with video games is that he also believed that stories shape character. So, for example, he actually believed in censoring certain poetry, and that was because he thought repeated exposure changes the soul. So I think if he saw modern gaming culture, he'd probably worry the most about people spending, thousands of hours emotionally invested in fabricated worlds and accomplishments, because this is all time that could have been spent in the pursuit of wisdom. So I think Plato would have hated video games. Let's keep it pushing though and talk about his student, the iconic Aristotle, next. So Aristotle actually disagreed with his teacher Plato on many fundamental issues, right? Rather than focusing on abstract ideals, Aristotle was interested in practical questions about how human beings should live. His most influential work, Nicomachean Ethics, argues that the ultimate goal of life is achieving eudaimonia, which can be translated as human flourishing or living well. Aristotle argued that happiness is activity of the soul in accordance with virtue. In other words, to Aristotle, happiness isn't just feeling that emotion, but to also strive to live excellently. He also famously wrote, "We work in order to have leisure." And with this, I think a key delineation for Aristotle was that leisure isn't bad, it's actually one of the highest goods. The problem or nuance for him was the idea of wasting leisure, or leisure, if you will. With all of that established, here's where I think Aristotle would land in terms of video games. A game that builds friendships, or a game that causes you to think strategically or persevere, or a game that leads you towards moral reflection, those would all be okay in his book, because those are things that could lead to and contribute towards your flourishing within his framework for eudaimonia. However, a game that doesn't improve your character or life by any conceivable metric, a game that is purely escapism or spending time with no tangible growth opportunities for you as a person, yeah, he'd probably tell you to pass on that, because amusement should not dominate life. So I think actually Aristotle he'd be more closely aligned with his teacher's teacher, Socrates, in that the individual use case of video games would greatly determine how he feels about them. Epicurus founded a philosophical school centered on happiness, but not in the way most people imagine. His teachings, preserved through works like the Letter to Menelaus and the Principal Doctrines, argue that the best life is not one of endless indulgence, but one characterized by tranquility, friendship, and freedom from, unnecessary suffering. Pretty straightforward, right? For Epicurus, the goal wasn't maximizing pleasure, but minimizing disturbance. Epicurus thought that many pleasures should actually be avoided because they produce greater suffering later on. He wrote that pleasure means freedom from disturbance and pain, not endless stimulation. And honestly, I think that's an incredibly modern framework for thinking about games. Think of it this way, right? Having a quiet evening to yourself and melting the stressors of life by mentally escaping into a beautiful game like, say, Prince of Persia, one of my favorites. That is a true authentic pleasure. Grinding battle passes in a game like Call of Duty, which you don't even enjoy and you're only on because of FOMO, while also buying operator outfits from the store just for the dopamine spike of having something new. Epicurus would probably tell you to stop immediately and wouldn't support that type of gaming activity. So for him, the evaluation of video games is less about how they feel while you play them and more about if your life garners peace from playing them, especially when you log off and sort of take inventory of your life afterwards. Zeno of Citium was the founder of Stoicism, which is one of the most influential philosophical movements in human history. Although most of his writings have been lost, his ideas survived through later Stoics who expanded upon them. At the heart of Stoicism is the belief that virtue is the only true good and that external circumstances matter far less than our response to them. So as the founder of Stoicism, Zeno believed that external things are neither good nor bad in themselves, only virtue truly matters. For example, money isn't good, poverty isn't bad, success isn't good, failure isn't bad. What matters is your navigation of life, or how you yourself react to things that are external to you. It's only natural that within Zeno's school of thought, video games also wouldn't necessarily matter. As a Stoic, Zeno could spend hours gaming without moral concern if it didn't interfere with living virtuously. Likewise, someone could spend only 30 minutes gaming while allowing frustration or obsession to dominate their character while they get stomped in online multiplayer or lose over and over again to a boss battle. And that would be in complete misalignment with Stoicism. So for Zeno, the medium of video games itself wouldn't carry moral weight, it would just be like anything else, right? Your individual response to gaming would be what matters to him. If every other philosopher on this list sounded relatively reasonable so far, I'd like to tell you that stops here. Diogenes was anything but, as the most famous representative of cynicism. Diogenes rejected wealth, status, luxury, and social convention with a level of commitment that bordered on performance art. Rather than writing grand philosophical treatises, he taught through outrageous public behavior designed to expose what he saw as the absurdity of human society. I'll give you some brief examples to put Diogenes in scope. One time, when he saw a child drinking water with cupped hands, he threw away his drinking cup, saying the child had shown him he still owed an unnecessary possession. Diogenes allegedly lived in a large storage jar meant to store wine or grain, just to demonstrate that people need far less than they think. It's also claimed that he performed many ordinary bodily functions openly in public because he thought society's shame around natural behavior was irrational. The last Diogenes factoid I'll share is that when Alexander the Great visited him and offered to grant him any wish, Diogenes responded to Alexander and said, "Stand out of my sunlight," basically telling the man who is arguably the most important or impactful human who ever walked Earth that he had nothing to offer him except to move a little bit so that he would stop blocking the sun shining on him. I've always loved this quote because this is like the epitome of like when you have an argument with someone and then later that night in the shower or bath you realize what you actually should have said or what the wittiest comeback would have been. Diogenes was the dude who always said that witty thing in lifetime with no restraint, which is telling because his comeback to Alexander literally is immortalized and still spoken about 2,400 years later, roughly. Imagine saying something so absurd and clever that it lives that long and is passed down across the ages of human communication. It's just amazing, but I digress. It should be obvious that Diogenes is someone who believed happiness came from radical self-sufficiency and freedom from unnecessary desires, that someone like this would probably see gaming culture as voluntarily creating chains for yourself. So he would definitely not be for the habit of playing video games and would line it up as yet another unnecessary possession. I think to kind of wrap things up here, I just want to say that what's striking is that almost none of these philosophers would ask whether video games are inherently good or bad. That's our question. Their question would be different. Socrates would ask you why you play. Plato would ask whether games pull you away from truth. Aristotle would ask whether they cultivate virtue. Epicurus would ask whether they leave you peaceful. Zeno would ask whether they affect your character. Diogenes would ask why you need them at all. And maybe that's the real lesson, right? The value of video games is difficult to quantify because so much of it depends on how you use them and when you use them. If you take away one thing from this video, I hope it's an extra layer of introspection before each time you pick up a controller and before each time you decide which game to play. You might find that there's still quite a bit of value you can extract from your sessions just by being a little bit more intentional about how you play and when. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. It's an absolute honor to be able to create videos for you all. We are now just about 300 people away from 11,000 subscribers at this point on the channel, which means it means more to me than you will ever know. Guys, I'll keep it a buck. I would love to make this into a series and visit different eras of philosophers, so if you enjoy this video, please support it, and I thought it could be a fun summer series for us, but no worries if you're not game. I got some other things on my sleeve, as always. Now, my longtime friends in the comments know that I say this all the time, but I'll never stop saying it. But I can never quantify what it means to me or us to have one person care about the videos that we make, let alone the amount of us here now. So if you're enjoying the discussions in the comments or the videos themselves, definitely subscribe. We'd be honored to have you join us here. There are links in my description to cool stuff, so please take a look if you'd like to support the channel in ways beyond subscribing. Check out the other videos on my channel for more content like this, and have a great day, night, or morning, and remember to be kind and thoughtful. Peace.